The Bruins and Canadiens have created a rivalry that's seen some shit. It's full of tradition and blood and Stanley Cups, but rivalry and beef are two different things. One can help propel the other, sure, but beef requires a special group of players seeing way too much of each other to turn something storied into, well, whatever this was. Stylistically, these teams were a powder keg. The big, bad Bruins could change games with their physical play. They owned a size advantage over most teams, best exemplified by their captain Zdeno Chara, who was more than ready to stick up for a teammate. But guys like Milan Lucic rarely needed the help, and the smaller Brad Marchand could also hold his own or just serve as a lightning rod to get things going. The Canadiens were smaller, speedier, and had a cast of fresh faces seemingly prescribed for this rivalry. Subban emerged as a star defenseman with solid scoring ability, but an even better ability to poke the bear. Guys like Max Pacioretty and eventually Alexei Emelin made it clear this was a team that still could get physical. This crew headlined a new wave of players that were ready to fire up some beef. Heading into 2010-2011, there wasn't much reason to guess what was in store. Sure, there were a couple mini feuds that tried to get off the ground. They'd met in the playoffs with more regularity, but things were fairly calm. Enter Subban and Marchand. In their second time facing off that season, as the Bruins sliced his way up the ice, PK caught him with a massive hit that sent Marchand to the bench. It also sent some Bruins after Subban, who not only shrugged them off, but set the Habs up with a man advantage. In that order of operations, it pissed off Boston. He hit a Bruin, he declined fights, he drew a penalty, he established what would become a theme. David Krejci voiced Boston's disapproval of how Montreal, being a smaller team, could get away with some stuff that a bigger, more physical team like Boston couldn't, which led to the Bruins taking things into their own hands. The Habs pretty much said, yeah, you got it in one. They knew it was an emotional matchup, so why not play right into that? And PK didn't mince words when describing the team's mentality against Boston. This new batch of Canadiens was already drawing the ire of Boston faithful. What amplified things was that for the first half of the season, Montreal had the Bruins' number as the teams were neck and neck in the standings. Even when they squared off for a third time and the Bruins had a 2-0 lead with under 3 to play, the Habs found a way to pull off the comeback in overtime. And thanks to that extra time together, after Pacioretty scored his game winner, he celebrated with a little shove to Chara. Chara disapproved. Looked to take on the entire Habs line by himself, but the refs managed to squash things for now. As Boston's captain was escorted off the ice, Montreal took over the top spot in the division. That meant the Habs were in more of a joking mood when discussing the event after the game, with Pacioretty adding that he couldn't even move the 6'9" defender. As for Chara, he had no intentions of chatting. Considering how the teams were built, it was a little surprising who was pushing who around. That was on the mind of Bruins head coach Claude Julien ahead of their next showdown. Julien had a special perspective on the rivalry, having spent a few years behind Montreal's bench, and looked to send a message to his guys, which in turn was relayed to the Habs through fists and goals. February 9th, 2011 became something special. With just 2 points separating the teams, they turned in an absolutely wild performance. Emotions overflowed at the end of the first, thanks to Carey Price shoving Lucic from behind a few times. Lucic quickly countered, and the Habs defense, specifically Subban, responded in turn. Everyone got involved with the clock at 0, and a couple of our key beef boys got a little separation from the pack. But with 3 of the 4 officials focused on them, the tension just kept on building. But it finally got some release during a second period that felt like a full game all by itself. 7 goals in just over 6 minutes. It was an explosion that no one could have seen coming, and left the broadcasters baffled and giddy.
Aren't these 2 of the best defensive teams in the league, Jack? 1 and 2, baby!
But there was also the more expected explosion, and that got sparked by this icing call.
Marchand unloads. Now we got a Donnybrook going.
Marchand shouldn't have finished this check, but since he did, everyone jumped to the corner, including a pair with some fresh history. Chara tried his hardest to get Pacioretty to square up, but the Hab declined with a little turtling. Not to be left out, Tim Thomas skated all the way over to ask Price for a dance, which mostly ended in exhausted smiles. Their comic relief capped off a scuffle that would leave the penalty boxes well beyond capacity. Then, once Boston stretched their lead late, the beef again took full focus. Subban had sparred with Nathan Horton all night long, often getting the worst end of things. So when Subban came in with his stick high and Horton offered a shove, gloves went flying. But Lucic also really wanted Subban and caused a pileup in the corner, then hogged PK for himself. Thanks to the refs, we still wouldn't get Subban throwing punches, and this would just be an amuse-bouche to the final dish. With nothing but beef to play for, Andrew Ferentz and Travis Moen got us started behind the net. As they went to the ice, the rest paired up and the Canadiens took a few more L's on the night. Oh, poor Tom Pyatt, you beautiful boy. There was one last gasp as Adam McQuaid, possibly on Chara's behalf, tried to get Pacioretty to fight. But the refs were ready to go home, and I can't blame them. The game had gotten so out of hand that people were asking what place fighting still had in the sport. But for the Bruins, that night of absurd numbers was worn as a badge of honor. Marchand made it clear they had been sick of getting beat by Montreal, in both senses of the word. The fact they were able to maintain the lead meant they could retake the physical edge as well. A mission easier said than done since they continued to try and fight a team that didn't want to fight. He called out Subban specifically, claiming he declined 4 fights on 1 shift. With 2 more regular season matchups and playoff potential, it seemed there would be plenty of chances for that to change. But their next time facing off, the beef took a different look. After going at it with varied results over the last 2 games, Pacioretty and Chara caught up with less than 20 seconds left in the second period. Chara finished a check, arguably late, which guided Pacioretty's head into one of the barriers along the bench, resulting in one of the scarier sights within the sport. It left him unconscious on the ice, needing to be stretchered off. The hit understandably stole headlines from Montreal's win. It sent Pacioretty to the hospital, but once the league reviewed things, they decided not to suspend Chara. And there were a lot of thoughts about this. It was already a brutal hit that could have been much, much worse. Pacioretty was left fuming while in recovery. He felt that Chara had some intent behind the hit. Those who were on the ice described the moment as sounding like a gun went off. At that point, Chara wasn't too apologetic, said that it was unfortunate and it was on his mind. But he also didn't believe he was fully to blame here. Maybe the guy going at full speed leaned and jumped into the turnbuckle. Historically, Chara had been a pretty clean player, which was the main argument for why he wasn't suspended. Most folks, though, threw his past out the window. It was less about him and more about the league not sending a message to curb dangerous hits. Even Chara's teammate, Patrice Bergeron, who had unique insight on what Pacioretty was going through, wondered whether that type of hit at its most innocent level should be in the game. Had it been left up to the fans, Chara would have faced something bigger than just a suspension. Montreal's police did in fact open an investigation on the Bruin, but while that would take time to get sorted out, hockey had to be played, and these teams still had to see each other again. Talk of retribution came to no surprise for Chara. His coach, though, summed up the last few months. A storied rivalry that turned uglier than you'd want, which would justify a revenge narrative. It just would need to be carried out by Montreal. And just in case the Habs needed a little more reason to do so, Mark Recchi stoked the flames by accusing the Canadiens of blowing Pacioretty's injury out of proportion in hopes of getting Chara suspended. He later claimed to just be trying to take some of the heat off Chara. It's just there are less shitty ways you could do that, Mark. But with retribution in the air, their next matchup was a different type of beating for Montreal. And although the Habs won the regular season series, Boston had completely stolen the momentum just in time for these teams to meet in the playoffs. That opening round matchup turned into an absolutely incredible back-and-forth series, with just some minor moments for our sake, like a middle finger to the fans or the occasional fight, but the biggest beef changer was that Boston got proper bragging rights. And not just for winning a grueling 7-game series. They went on to win the whole dang thing. It was just the second time they'd ever gone through Montreal on the way to winning the Cup. And while even in victory, some Bruins still found time to focus on the flopping proficiency of certain players, as Boston hoisted the cup, it solidified a gap between these teams that was about to grow wider. Montreal tailspinned the following season, and with two sides going in different directions, things understandably calmed down, in a relative sense. There were still moments like PK and Marchand dropping gloves, but that only made it clear why this was a rare sight for Subban. Sure, they still hated each other, it's just that would always be the case in the storied rivalry. As Boston finished top of the division, Montreal was down at the bottom, and those places would remain stagnant longer than normal thanks to a lockout which shortened the 2012-13 season. But that shortened schedule might have been just what they needed to reheat the beef. With 4 meetings in only 2 months, there was no way to avoid their feelings. Each contest was a one-score game. The Habs won 3 of the 4, and after each of those Boston defeats, the outcry resurfaced over Subban's or the Habs' less than honorable tactics. But most importantly, the Bruins found a new pain in the ass. Alexei Emelin in his second year embraced the feud like so many before him. In March, he had a little body shot on Tyler Seguin, which led to a response from Chara down behind the Montreal goal. That earned the Bees captain a game misconduct during yet another fight-filled night. But Chara wasn't the only one to set his sights on the Hab. He and Lucic were a natural pair. Left wing against right defenseman, physical players, they were on a collision course. And as they got to know each other, their relationship fully bloomed in 2014. A year where Montreal once again had Boston's number. That was possibly because when it came to playing their rivals, Lucic said Boston was letting emotions get the better of them and not playing their type of hockey. But in their final regular season meeting with the Habs, no one, including Lucic himself, put weight to his words. Emotions flowed very early in the first when Emelin upended Milan with a pretty great hip check. Chara disagreed and gave everyone a chance to get together. As the broadcast pointed out, Lucic was ready to start some shit.
Lucic is over here on the Bruins bench right now, telling the Canadiens bench, you just woke up the beast.
But when Emelin repeatedly declined his offers, the Bruin opted for a little grundle tap that sent the defenseman to the ice. Lucic made his frustrations clear afterwards, calling Emelin a chicken for not wanting to fight.
I mean, if he wasn't scared, he would want to, he'd stand up and hit me and not go after my knees. So, it just shows how big of a chicken he is that he needs to go down like that to take me down. So.
And he wasn't the only one who continued to be frustrated by Montreal. But good news for Brad. Plenty more opportunities to do some hits. That same pair continued to serve as spokesmen for the rivalry, but weren't looking to offer any new bulletin board material. Marchand even threw some compliments Subban's way, while pointing out that Boston needed to take every chance they got to hit him without falling for the traps that he presented. For Montreal, they knew what this Bruins team could do, and while they offered praise, the Habs were also aware their usual antics may not have the same effect with more on the line. But even with relative niceties, folks saw the potential this series had, and for better or worse, that potential was met. The good? Game 1 required double overtime thanks to Boston scoring 3 goals in the third. The bad? Once Subban ended it there, things got ugly in a new way. The Bruins organization spoke out quickly, condemning the abuse directed at Subban, which was on such a scale that the slur began trending on Twitter in Boston. Marchand and Lucic denounced the racist messages, standing up for a guy they'd made it well known they wanted to punish in the past. Boston sports writer Dan Shaughnessy perfectly summed up the city's relationship with Subban after Game 3. He pointed out that if PK was wearing a Bruins jersey doing the same stuff he was doing for Montreal, fans would be pushing for a statue of him outside the arena. But for now, it was the one sour note to another amazing series. They once again needed 7 games to decide things, but this time Montreal finished on top with decisive wins in the final 2 contests. And as the teams gathered to show respect, Lucic had some feelings to share with the guys he'd gone against maybe a couple times too many. Emelin and Dale Weiss were on the receiving end of some choice words, which quickly made their way to the media. The Bruin was asked about the comments, but wasn't interested in going into that. That was for babies. He felt like a code was broken, not by him, and wasn't going to apologize for it. Lucic defended it by saying he played on emotion, always had, so maybe he was prone to an emotional outburst or two. The Habs obviously didn't expect him to genuinely kill someone, all could agree that would definitely cross the line, but they were expecting a tough game the next time they shared the ice. And at the start of the 2014 season, they got it, although Emelin once again was required to set him off. A well-timed shoulder sent the Bruin to a familiar place. And when Lucic expressed some of his emotions against Emelin from behind, he was again booked, which helped the Canadiens grow their lead. From the box, he directed emotion towards the Montreal crowd like he was rolling dice or something, it's hard to tell. But he'd go on to salute the refs and say his farewells to Montreal as he received a game misconduct with 20 seconds remaining. So if he'd planned a revenge tour, it hadn't gone too smoothly. But if nothing else, he was consistent and true to himself in how he played, which is really important to this beef. One that winds around in a bit of an unorthodox way and means something different to different people at different times. For Lucic, his emotions had helped fuel not just his performance, but his contributions to the rivalry. Tito Curtis put it very well. He wasn't just being a bastard for the sake of being a bastard. His passion was needed by Boston. He loved what he did, so at its most basic level, can't that effort be appreciated even by the most diehard Canadian fan? It's like Subban. His jersey would sell out in Boston if he was playing for the Bees. But because he agitated them, threw the Bruins off their game, did whatever he needed to do to help his team win, he's loathed in Boston. That goes the same for Marchand, for Chara, for Emelin, and I think that's exactly why this rivalry has remained great in a traditional sense while also capable of catching fire at any second. They have always been together. They have always complemented each other. But for the most part, there has also been respect. And it's been when that was lost that things really changed. That's what led to repeated cheap shots, or regrettable comments, or games filled with brawl after brawl. But because the history of their rivalry predates any of the players, even anyone watching this, they'll continue to find an appreciation for one another, which helps level things out. It just might take a long time to find that appreciation. So this iteration of beef is done. It petered out as the teams missed each other in the playoffs, and a schedule with less divisional games meant fewer chances to keep it fresh. Players went off to wear new jerseys, find new foes, but surely this won't be the last time Boston and Montreal's historic rivalry jumps the shark and lands in beefier waters. All it takes is the right collection of players and a little overexposure. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want, take a second to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. Then check out my favorite beef, the Red Wings and Avalanche. Or maybe this is more up your alley. I don't know, live your truth.